As we continue our study through 1 Corinthians, we begin today in chapter 14. It reads, "Follow the way of love, and eagerly desire the gifts of the Spirit, especially prophecy." Now, as the chapter goes on, it talks about the value of spiritual gifts, but it also puts a perspective on the idea of spiritual gifts. First, it begins with follow the way of love. What is the way of love? Well, it's a way that's not self-seeking, but that is seeking to take care of others, to care for others, to put others ahead of ourselves. I wrote a book several years ago called The Single Dad Survival Guide. It was published by Random House and it did very well. Back when it was first released in early 2000, I was doing a lot of radio and TV shows where I would be questioned by call-in parents who were single parenting, and many of the parents wanted to know, when is my son a man? When is my daughter a woman? How do I make the distinction? And after some careful thought, I realized that, well, when they accept responsibility and they begin to be able to discipline themselves to care for others ahead of themselves, that to me was the moment that we could distinguish that they were no longer children. As we continue to read in chapter 14, it will even come to a point where it says on this whole issue that we are to not be children. Verse 20 says, "Brothers and sisters, stop thinking like children. In regard to evil, be infants, but in your thinking, be adults." In other words, stop just using the things of God for self-service or to play at life. This was in reference to the idea that prophecy had a great place in the way of love and the future of the church, because prophecy was God speaking to us, speaking through us and to us as a church, as a people, giving us aid, encouraging us, lifting us up. Whereas many of the gifts were being exploited just as selfish. And Paul uses the gift of tongues in regards to this. He talks about tongues being for the individual. Not that there's anything wrong with doing something to build yourself up or to have an ecstatic and special time with the Lord through the speaking in tongues. But Paul makes the distinction that the gift of prophecy is more important than the gift of tongues, because the gift of prophecy serves others, serves the church. It is a voice from God to us. This gives us a distinct way to examine not only the gifts we receive from God, but the way that we behave with the things that we have in life. Are we following the way of love, which would help us to treat others ahead of ourselves with respect, with care, building them up, strengthening them? Or are we using the things we have in this life simply to entertain ourselves, simply to feel good about ourselves? Are we using what we have as toys, or are we as adults meeting the responsibilities in life of those around us? Day to day, there's an awful lot that people need in our communities. They need prayer. They need encouragement. They need help. We can be those people. Jesus says that is the distinctive characteristic of his disciples. This is how they will know you are my disciples, by the way you love one to another. John 13:35. So when we look at gifts and when we look at the things we want to receive from God, let's keep in mind that when this whole book begins, chapter 3, verse 16, Paul talks about when we come together that we are a temple of God and the Spirit of God dwells in us. So, to be full of God's Spirit, to live in such a way that we celebrate the way of love, means that we will always make an effort to be accountable, to put others ahead of ourselves, not just to entertain ourselves in life, but to be of service and find our joy in our ability to love God by loving others. Have a great Sunday.